So we're going to be in chapter 4, and we're going to slow down and understand this one. You have to understand the sin offering. That's the key to understanding all of the rest of the offerings. So we're going to slow down. Not only are we going to understand chapter 4, but we're going to understand the atonement. Again, we're going to go over the atonement. And obviously, most of you have been in our teaching, and you know exactly what I teach about life and being filled with life. So we're going to get there. Before I do that, though, before we get over there, I want to take you on a nerd tour. So I want to take you behind the scenes, how the nerdiness happens, and so I'm gonna show you. I didn't prepare the whole meal. I kind of cut up the vegetables a little bit, just so that we can have a running start, right? But you'll see how we mix things together, right? So what you have on the screen is basically you have all of chapter 4. See, if you look at all of chapter 4, 13, 22, 27, 32. But if you notice, the first two sections, I have it in some sort of outline form. Then you go into verse 22. Now, if you have a printed Bible with you today, you probably have it divided into sections, into paragraphs. You probably have it divided into paragraphs. And so the paragraphs obviously are kind of arbitrary, right? They are the translator committee making decisions what sections go together. Right. Amen. And in some cases, they don't get it right. It's not inspired, obviously. Right. I have found that the NASB, which is the one I use, the NASB, being one of the most literal translations, they are actually good at dividing the passages into paragraphs that kind of go together. Right here, they did, and in this chapter, they did a great job, and I'll show you. You'll see it because this chapter is very easy to see. But if you look at it, then you'll see how it is divided into. They divide the chapter into verse 1 through 12, then 13 all the way to 21. Then you have 22 to 26. And then 27 to 31, and then 32 through 35. You may have about the same division in your Bible. All right, so let's take this from the top. Chapter 4. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, if..." Now, we've talked about this. If you look on your screen, I have the Hebrew word for you. Where it says if, we have the word ki. Ki. Let me see if I can make this just a little bigger. Don't want to get it all off of the screen, but a little bit there. All right, so the word ki, and look at verse 3. We have another if, which is the word im. Ki and im. So we've talked about this in our studies, how ki introduces major cases and im introduces subcases. So watch this. If a person sins unintentionally, that's the big case. Then you go to verse 3. If the anointed priest sins, that's your first subcase. So the big case is in the book, it's in the context of the whole book. You know, you have, your first big case was the sin offering, the burnt offering, chapter 1. Your second big case was the fellowship offering or peace offering, the grain offering, chapter 2. Third case, peace offering, chapter 3. Now you are at your next big case, chapter 4, which is the sin offering. So that's why the big case here, the key. If a person sins unintentionally, now we're dealing with sin. In a little while, we're going to talk about this word unintentionally because it kind of throws you off. It's like, what do you mean unintentionally? Like, can I murder someone unintentionally? Can I rob a bank unintentionally? Kind of impossible, right? Kind of impossible. Can I lie unintentionally? I'm not sure. So we'll get to that word unintentionally. I want us to see the structure first. And I'm giving you a peek of how I approach a chapter, a passage. So the first thing that I look for is structure. I'm looking for structure. Yes?
With key and eam, you can have several eam.
We are going to.
Cases.
We are going to.
This is a lot like the case statement you see in Java or other structured programming languages.
It's logical. It's very logical.
Scripture,
Yes.
Darn, it doesn't show up that way in this English format. But thank you.
Right.
We're not the geeky.
All right. So we have, in verse 3, you have your first subcase, eam. So it says, if the anointed priest sins. Now you go down, this is where your division in the chapters come into play. You go down to the next section, verse 13. Now if the whole congregation of Israel commits error. Now you are the second eam, so the second subcase, verse 13. You scroll down to the next section, verse 22. We're going to throw a curve here. Because instead of if, it says when. When. And it's a different Hebrew word. I can show you that in a little bit when we flip over to the biblical text. I'll show you what Hebrew word that is. But it functions the same way. It functions the same way. And in fact, I think the reason he does it is because this is the one that is kind of in the middle. It's kind of like, this is your meat, right? You have bun, meat. So he's going to make a difference. The one in the middle is a sandwich. I'm saying that because it's called a sandwich structure.
Oh, wow.
So you're kind of sandwiching. Or a bookcase ending. That's another way that they call it. It's a bookcase ending. So you have your bookcase here, your bookcase, and then you have your books in the middle, and then you have your favorite book right in the middle, right? Okay, so that's why he kind of, probably for style purpose, just to vary it, or just to highlight it. Sometimes they throw a different word just to highlight it, to kind of wake you up as you're reading. Oh, this is different. Why? And you go search. Why is it different? And then you find a treasure there. Verse 27 goes back to eam. That's another case. Now, if any one of the common people sins unintentionally. So you started out with the priest, the whole congregation. Then you went over to the whole congregation. Then you went over to a leader. So they differentiate between a priest and a leader. So the priest, the whole congregation, a leader. If a leader sins, a non-priest leader. Then verse 27, if anyone from the congregation, from the common people, sins unintentionally. And then in verse 32, you have another case, but it's kind of different. Because it says, but if he brings a lamb. So this is also eam. It's a subcase, but it's kind of like a subcase of the subcase. Because this is a subcase of 27, of any one of the common people. So, if any one of the common people sins unintentionally, verse 28, then it says, then he shall bring for his offering a goat, a female, right? And then it says, but you can also bring a subcase, you can also bring a lamb. So that's where that subcase of the subcase comes in. So the first thing that you do, you approach the passage, the first thing you're going to do is, what's the structure here? Is there a structure here? What's the structure here? Because the structure is inspired. It's within the text. And that will make it a lot easier for you to understand what is the passage trying to say. What is the writer, what is the author, what is God, what is the Holy Spirit trying to say through the scripture? Did he put this in some sort of structure? Because if he did, then I want to know it. Because he's trying to communicate through it. That's a lot of the meaning is right there on the structure. When you are looking at let's say at a story in Genesis or in the Gospels, then your structure is going to come through the different scenes. Think of it like a movie. Here's the scene, the opening scene, here's what happens, then the camera goes to another place, right? Another character, introducing something different or somebody different. That's what you do in narrative. This is very procedural. This is like step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. So that's how you handle the different types of literature. Yes?
But among the people, how would they define when they want to make atonement for their trespass? Who would interpret for them between a female goat or a lamb or a...
You studied the scripture when you started studying this when you were 5. And your whole family, you grew up studying this, learning about this. Your whole family talked about this, so you knew. You knew.
So the priest, who taught them?
Who taught
Who taught the people this?
You're at home, the priest in the country. I mean, all of society it lives around the reality of the temple. So it's not like you didn't know. I mean, there were some cases in which you could say, okay, I need to go to a priest to decide whether it's this type of unclean or that type of uncleanness. But in the majority of it, you were well educated into that. Yes.
Can you go back to the if and the when?
Okay, so let's go up. Let's take it up to the top.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And can you make it bigger? Thank you.
All right. So in verse 2, if a person sins unintentionally, if a person sins, that introduces the big case, a big case. So you have, this is case number 4, right? The first one was the burnt offering. Second one was the grain offering. Third one was the peace offering. And fourth one now in chapter 4 is the sin offering. So we're going to talk about the sin offering. Within that one, then you have subcases. And that's what we see here with the verse 3. If it is the anointed priest, if it is the whole congregation, if it is the ruler or a leader, and if it is an individual, and then there are 2 cases for the individual, which is he can bring a goat or he can bring a lamb, a female goat or a lamb.
So the three is the said cases.
Yeah. Verse 3 as a subcase is the word im. And so are the other sections, like in verse 13, that's im, if the whole congregation, and so on. Yes?
I don't want to spend too much. Is it basically the fact that it's a new topic, the sin offering, that gives it the main, if you will, which we call the kin, and the story under it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say new topic because it is a category.
A category.
A category within the same topic. Yes.
Right. I got it.
Yeah. All right. So let's take it back to the top, because what I do then is I copy and paste my text, put it right there, and I start looking primarily for the main verbs and complete ideas. Where is the action here? Okay, so let's walk it. If a person, let's take it in verse 3. If the anointed priest sins so as to bring guilt on the people, so that's a whole thought, but I don't have space, right? Because I have to blow this up for you. So I put it right under it, but to the side. I put it like a little to the side because I'm looking for the main action. Look, if the anointed priest sins, then let him offer to the Lord a bull. So this way, this is also called a thought flow, because it helps you skip to the main part, and then you understand the main idea of the passage. You're organizing it for yourself, right? 75% of life is organizing stuff. I just made that up, that number, but a lot of life is just organizing stuff. Yeah.
Some of us, that's true.
For some of us, a little higher if you have teenage boys in the house. But I digress. Right. Okay, so if the anointed priest sins, then let him offer to the Lord a bull without defect. This is information about the bull without defect, as a sin offering for the sin that he has committed. He shall bring the bull to the doorway of the tent of meeting before the Lord. So now we're starting. Watch this. We're talking about he shall bring the bull. What are we going to say about it? That he shall lay his hand on the head of it and slay the bull before the Lord. That's what you're going to do with the bull. So the text is, you're organizing the text for yourself so you can catch what it's really saying.
What would the anointed priest have done specifically to bring guilt upon people as opposed to any other type of
When he is offering sacrifices on behalf, let's say the daily sacrifices are burnt offerings on behalf of the congregation. So he is acting on behalf of the congregation. If he messes up on this, then that is going to reflect on the congregation. Let's say that he shows up and he realizes later he was unclean. And at the moment he didn't realize that he was unclean. So that will be one easy case. Verse 5. Then the anointed priest is to take some of the blood. You see, we first talked about bringing the bull. And we said a few things about it. Verse 5, then now we start talking about the blood, taking some of the blood. We're going to say a lot of things about the blood. Look, bring it to the tent of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. The priest shall also put some of the blood, we're still talking about the blood, on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense, which is before the Lord. Little detail about what altar are we talking about. And the blood of the bull shall, and all the blood, or the rest of the blood of the bull shall pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering. So this is what you do with the blood. Verse 8. He shall remove from it all the fat of the bull of the sin offering. Now we're going to talk about the fat. A lot of instructions about the blood. Now a lot of instructions about the fat. What are we going to do with the fat? Okay, so the fat, number one, you're going to identify it. Right? You remove from it all the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat which is on the entrails, and the 2 kidneys with the fat that is on them, which is on the loins, and the lobe of the liver, which he shall remove with the kidneys, just as it is removed from the ox of the sacrifice of peace offerings. So he's making a reference to chapter 3. And the priest is to offer them up, all of the fat, in smoke on the altar of burnt offering. All of that was just talking about the fat. Verse 11. But the hide, the skin of the bull, and all its flesh, or the sacrifice itself, the animal itself, right? With its head, its legs, entrails, and refuse, that is all the rest of the bull, he is to bring out to a clean place. So you can read it this way, see. But the hide of the bull and all its flesh, he is to bring out to a clean place. So this way you organize your main thoughts. And burn it on the wood where the ashes are poured out, and it shall be burned. Yes?
They must have taken a lot of people to do all that.
Yes. A lot.
And it
A lot.
was not also just an hour or 2 hour deal. It was,
You had thousands of priests.
wow.
You had thousands of priests. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we come to verse 13. I got to rush because this is just the mechanics first. We're going through the mechanics, and then we're going to get to a little bit of the meat of this. Here's our second subcase, right? If the whole congregation of Israel commits error, and so we're going to say a few things about that error, right? The matter escapes the notice of the assembly, and they commit any of the things which the Lord has commanded not to be done, and they become guilty when the sin which they have committed becomes known. All of this, now we get to what are they going to do, right? So if the whole congregation of Israel commits error, then the assembly shall offer a bull of the herd for a sin offering, and bring it before the tent of meeting. Then the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands, and the bull shall be slain. Then the anointed priest is to bring some of the blood, right? We talked about the blood, right? It's going to be very, very similar, a little bit of different. And here's where you begin to see why is it different. Why is it different with a priest as with the congregation? And then when you have all of the evidence, then you have to account for it. You have to account for the differences. And most of the reasons for the differences is going to be based on the level of holiness of the person involved. Whether it's a priest or the whole congregation, or just a regular Joe, like you and me. So a lot of information about the blood, then a lot of information about the fat. And so we come to verse 20. He shall also do with the bull just as he did with the bull of the sin offering. Thus he shall do with it. So the priest shall make atonement for them, and they will be forgiven. So let's now take a look at atonement. What does atonement mean? So we're going to switch now on the screen to our regular text. This concludes your nerdy tour, your behind-the-scenes tour as to how do I study and organize things and break it down and how you get to understand some of these things. All right, so we're going to go back to the text the way that we usually have it. Okay, so now we can see at least the root word for some of the English words, behind the English words. Okay, but I actually want to show you some of these verses here. Okay, so we're going to understand atonement in the next 10 minutes. No problem, right? All right. Exodus 30, verse 9. These are very key verses. You want to jot down these verses, take this home, understand this, study this. So I'm giving you an introduction to these verses here. You shall not offer any strange incense on this altar. So what do you think? What altar are we talking about? The altar of incense, right? So do not offer any strange incense on this altar or burnt offering. You're not supposed to bring burnt offering into the altar of incense. Or meal offering, grain offering, mincha. And you shall not pour out a drink offering on it. Aaron shall make atonement on his horns once a year. Okay, once a year sounds like what? Yom Kippur. Okay, make atonement on his horns once a year. Let me just help you a little bit here also with this. So make atonement, kafar. In Hebrew, the F, right, it can be soft or it can be hard pronunciation. So when it is soft, sounds like an F. You have a lot of air coming off. Or it can be a complete stop, so it becomes a P, right? So that we get the word Kippur. You can see it there. This is the root word for Yom Kippur, right? So to make atonement, the Day of Atonement. So Aaron shall make atonement. How do we make atonement? All right, this is what we're going to answer here. To make atonement on his horns once a year, he shall make atonement on it with the blood of a sin offering. That's your first discovery right here. You've got to get a hold of this, put it in your soul, and understand the way that you make atonement is with the blood of a sin offering. You make atonement with the blood of a sin offering. Grab a hold of that one.
Leviticus 17.
This is 30, verse 10.
Right.
Yeah, we'll get to some of those in back to Leviticus. Okay, so the way we make atonement is with the blood of the sin offering. Of atonement. Once a year, throughout your generation, it is most holy to the Lord. Let's go to Exodus 29:36. Each day you shall offer a bull as a sin offering for atonement. Now we know this. You should offer a bull as a sin offering for atonement. We know that the way you make atonement is with the blood of a sin offering. This is how you make atonement. Right, so offer a bull as a sin offering for atonement. Watch this. And you shall purify the altar when you make atonement. Here's the second big truth that I want us to really grab hold of and put in our soul. That you purify the altar when you make atonement. In other words, to make atonement is to purify. To make atonement is to purify something. Now, watch this. Let's see. Okay, let me show you the next verse. We'll come back to this one. Next, Leviticus 8:15. Next, Moses slaughtered it and took the blood and with his finger put some of it around on the horns of the altar and purified the altar. We know this. The way you make atonement is with the blood of a sacrifice, and to make atonement means to purify. But look at this. Look at the Hebrew word purified. Chata. Chata. So let's go back over here. Same Hebrew word here, purify, chata, right? But look at the word for sin offering. chatat. You see how they are related? Here's what's happening. You take this is the noun here. This is the name of a thing. This is the sin offering. So take that English phrase, sin offering, and make it into a verb. I'm going to take this sin offering and I am going to sin offering the altar. That won't do. So how do you turn this word in English, right? How do you turn that noun into a verb? Purify. This is why we can be so certain that what a sin offering does is to purify. So much so that we've talked about this maybe a year or two ago. That we no longer want to call it a sin offering. It is too limiting. It doesn't communicate anything. We want to call it purification offering. Because that's what it does. That's what it does. So you're defining it by its function. You're understanding what it does, and then you're just going to call it that. It is a purification offering. It purifies. So we go back to we read this verse here, and you shall purify the altar when you make atonement for it. So to make atonement is to purify with the blood of a sin offering, because that's what a sin offering does. It purifies. Let's see. Let's go to Leviticus 17. You know this verse as well. Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. We talked about this. And I have given it to you. I've given you the blood on the altar to make atonement for your souls. Right? We know that we make atonement through blood. Right? Yes?
Yes.
I keep seeing the martyrs under the throne crying out to him and also the reference of the blood cries out to me from the ground. And I see when they're putting the blood at the base of the altar, I see the martyrs underneath the throne crying out to him. Is there a togetherness there?
A reference there, a connection there.
Yeah.
Yes, there is, but perhaps not in the way that we think. Or because obviously human blood does not make atonement.
Right.
But the life of a person, it's almost like, again, we used this example many times. You know, my kids just asked me for the car because they wanted to go shopping. Well, they came and asked me for the key, right? And I know what they meant, right? They mean the car. They don't just mean the key. Well, the blood means the life. And so when the blood cries out from the ground, is the life of this person that was unjustly taken. It's crying out. Cain and Abel, yeah. And same with the martyrs under the altar. In fact, look at this. In the Hebrew, in this verse, we say life, right? We see life, but look at the Hebrew word. It's the nephesh. That's the word for soul. So why do they say life then? Well, watch this. At the end of this verse, actually, the next verse, we know this one too. Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. The word for being, soul, nephesh. So it's you cannot divide life from soul. It's it wouldn't be soul anymore if it doesn't have life. Yes.
When it says pour it out at the base, they get sowed. It's the foundation of the altar. So the altar is built on its foundation is the blood, which is the same thing as
Adama, yeah. Mm-hmm. So when we say then, back to Leviticus 17, for the life, the soul of a person, the living soul characterized by life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. Giving you the blood to make atonement, right? Here comes the part of this verse that we need to remember. For it is the blood by reason of the life that makes atonement. It is the blood by reason of the life. So we have to examine blood and say, what is it in blood that makes atonement? Life. Life. So ultimately, life is what makes atonement. That's the bottom line. Life. So to make atonement is to purify with life. It's to infuse with life, like a detergent. You take a detergent and you rub the plate, and you're taking something off and you're infusing something in. So that as a result, when you smell it, you smell the fragrance, of whatever smell it was that you bought, that you use, right? But you're wiping something off. The reason why you make atonement with life is because the altar, or the whatever it is that you are purifying, was actually polluted with death. So this comes down to an issue of life and death. That's why you have to infuse life. So you wipe off death and you infuse life. That's what happens at atonement. That's what happens when any three of the liquids, we talked about the three liquids of Scripture, right? That's what happens when living water, that's why you eliminate uncleanness, lower levels of uncleanness with water, with a mikvah, immersing in water. The blood infuses with life at a higher degree than water, so it purifies from higher levels of uncleanness. And the oil is the max. It infuses people with the highest level of life. So when you are touched by the Spirit of God, what is happening to you is an infusion of life. And it will be manifested in many different ways. It will give you joy. It will give you love. It will give you shalom. It will give you patience. It will give you the fruit of the Spirit. That's life. That's being infused with life, being touched by holiness. Holiness touches you. The blood of Yeshua touches you. In His blood for us is also another way of invoking everything that He did for us. Everything that He accomplished for us, which we can summarize in one word: life. So His blood infuses you with His life, and you have victory. You have victory over sin. You have freedom from sin. It breaks the power of sin in your life and in my life. That's atonement. That's being infused with life. And obviously, the water of the Word breaks infuses with life, and he breaks habits and thoughts. That's atonement. An infusion with life. Take these verses, meditate on them. Ask for the Spirit of God to teach you from it. Think of this as, I may call upon you one of these days and say, okay, you come and teach atonement. Can you do that? Can you be prepared at a moment's notice? If I were to call upon you, right? And let's say that you and I are in a conference, right? And I say, I'm here with my good friend from my congregation. Listen, this person is such a great example of what God is doing at Sukkat Shalom. Why don't you tell them all about atonement? What is atonement?
Remind me not to go to a conference. Thanks for letting me know.
Right.
Somebody just left.
But see, I want this to really go deep into, because this is real life. This is not just some theology way up here. This is real life. Spiritual warfare is about death and life. It's about being filled with life. The more that you do in the body, the more authority that you're given in the body, in a congregation, the more infused you need to be with life. Because the more that you will have to fight unclean spirits.
Absolutely.
So you need to be filled with life.